to talk about the two tools of UiPath that are in the Discover phase that we're covering today, the Automation Hub and Task Capture. What I'd first like to discuss, though, is the advantages of having an RPA Center of Excellence. So for an organization that's just starting the automation journey, the centralized model would probably make the most sense. This is where you have a single COE for all your functions and all your business entities. This provides a single point for your organization that drives the automation program, and it allows you to set up standard procedures and a single governance model. Centralized model actually makes sense when you're starting the journey. The members of that team would be cross-functional, so you're going to need, for instance, an RPA sponsor, hopefully from your executive level. The lead is going to be just the RPA program manager. You'll have project managers, business analysts, developers, solution architects, change management members. So it's really, you'll have some SMEs in there for the different functions that you're thinking of automating. It's really going to be across the board membership in this group. And as your organization matures in their RPA processes, then it is feasible that you would want to move to a more federated model. This is where you still kind of have that central COE, but you also have some smaller center of excellences that are going to be tied to a specific business unit or a specific function. The advantage of starting with the centralized and then moving to the federal is that you maintain the same standards and practices that you've already established at the centralized level. And so it keeps consistency across your organization for your RPA. And that has been found to be a big benefit to a company. Within Automation Hub, you're going to capture and assess automation ideas. And these ideas can be submitted either using a top-down or a bottom-up approach. So the top-down approach is from your Center of Excellence group. Now, these ideas tend to be kind of company-wide automations, more broad in scope, more savings, also perhaps more complex. The bottom-up approach is from the employee. These ideas tend to be tied to a specific task that is often easily implemented and might generate just a small savings. But if you have a lot of employee-driven ideas, then the sum of the savings ends up being a lot of accumulated hours. A secondary benefit to this is a high level of employee satisfaction because you are relieving the employee of a tedious task. And so that's an important intangible benefit to the company. Additionally, having these employee-driven ideas illustrates that the automations are there to help them, not to replace them. And so it hopefully will reduce resistance to the RPA process. We do want to stress that automations are there to, again, help the employee to take some of those tedious tasks off their hands. We're not trying to replace them because they do have a lot of value, and we just want them to be able to do their full job, not just the little tedious tasks that take up so much of their time. So the Automation Hub is a collaborative tool for automation opportunity identification, pipeline management, and process repository. So you can maintain your automation pipeline centrally, even though it's distributed to all regions of the company. It provides a consistent RPA selection process based on an algorithm generated by this tool. And by providing a standard document template and the sharing of components, it also leads to rapid implementation time. So you can really reduce the time from idea submission to actual production time. There are 6 main features within Automation Hub. We've got the Opportunity Identifier and Pipeline Manager. This lets you produce a single pipeline of automation ideas for your enterprise. This one-stop shopping offers high visibility to all the RPA ideas and the status of feasibility of each one of them. The ROI calculator, this helps you choose the right automation opportunities. It has an easy-to-use ROI template. The documentation repository, this is a single place to store all of the documents related to your automation, and it also provides templates so you keep your documentation consistent throughout the enterprise. You can use the deliver templates, or you can customize them to your preference and have those be your default templates. The component gallery is where you can share automation components, so it'll speed up implementations and also produce consistent quality. For example, if you have a component to log into SAP, you can then share that component and use it for all automations that require that specific functionality, so you're not having to reproduce that function each time. The enterprise community, this helps engage your employees on the RPA process. It rewards them for their contributions. So this is the gaming page where your employees can earn badges for their participation in the program. And finally, the performance dashboard. It provides an aggregated view of the submitted automations in terms of number, performance benefits, and costs. So these dashboards can help decision makers when trying to figure out which automations should be pursued. One thing to note, they do show ROI information, but those are defined by the estimates done based on the assessments that you've performed. So the actual benefits are not shown in Automation Hub. You would have to get the UiPath Insights tool to get the actual benefits, and that's at the end, so in that measure phase at the end of the process. The other tool we're going to show is Task Capture. This is where you build your as-is and your to-be process maps. So it allows you to do a deep dive into your automation idea, and it allows you to quickly capture and share the specifics of that task that you're trying to automate. It can be accessed directly from within Automation Hub. The in-depth process capture is where you can automatically create the process flow map in one fell swoop. So it goes in and records every keyboard stroke and screenshot as you step through the entire process in a single session. The second way to do it is to use the process diagram builder, and this is where you build your process flow map manually, and then you use the task capture feature to record the screen prints just for that specific step. So regardless of which of those two methods you use to build the map, once it's built, you can use that editing panel to edit the screenshots. So you can add a title, a description, and then there's an image editor where you can add substance to the image. So you can blur to hide sensitive information, crop an image, add text, things like that. And finally, the export feature. This is where you can use a template to build the process design document, and it will insert that process flow map and all the captured steps into the appropriate section of the Word document. It also will generate the process statistics based on those steps that you've recorded. You're also always going to want it to export back to Automation Hub. This is to keep the map tied to that idea in Automation Hub so it can be reviewed and modified if necessary later. And you can also save the map externally, which can then be imported into another automation idea as a starting point. So this is helpful if there are two similar processes. Maybe you want to build one map and then use it as a starting point for the other. Or if you build your as-is map, you can use it as a starting point when you're trying to build your to-be map. So either one of those is helpful if you have saved that file externally. Okay, so this is Automation Hub. The first two sections, the Workspace and the Explore, these are the two that it's going to be visible to all users. The others are specific to other, if you have specific roles. So under the Workspace, this is where you show your ideas and their statuses, so anything that you've identified as something you're interested in. It's also where decision makers could go to identify what they want to approve, what they want to progress, what they want to start the assessment on. In the Explore area, we have the automations themselves. That's the picture we're looking at now. There's also this leaderboard, and this is that gaming section I had mentioned where your employees can earn badges for their participation in the program. Again, the goal is to promote interest in the automation ideas, get people involved, and make it so it's not something to be scared of. Again, we're not trying to replace their job. We're just trying to make it easier and less tedious. The first step on the automation when you have a new idea is to select the Submit Ideas section. You can see we've got employee-driven or Center of Excellence-driven. We're going to go ahead and go through the employee-driven segment. These are very similar. The only difference is when it's employee-driven, you actually need an approval. And if it's Center of Excellence-driven, you fill in kind of all the assessment and then you just get it reviewed by the SME. When you have an employee-driven idea, all they have to answer are 9 questions, so very simple. And the explanation of what they're looking for is over here on the left panel, and so it'll walk them through what they need to do. Okay, so the first question it's asking is, what is a short description of the automation that you want to look at? And so in this case, we're going to attach receiving documents to an associated PO, right? So you get your packing slip in and you want to attach it to your PO in your, we'll say we're doing it in SAP. The next is the name of this. So it's really just a shortened version to keep track of it from a header viewpoint, PO receipt attachment. Next is the hierarchy. The automation hub comes with a delivered hierarchy where your first step is your basically your department area. These are modifiable. So if this doesn't map to your requirements as far as automation goes, you can certainly modify it within your instance. In this case, I'm just going to say it's in the F&A area. We're doing order to reception because this is a PO receipt and it's a good and services reception. So again, these area selections are modifiable and based on your company's needs. The next is asking how rule-based is your task. So again, the explanation is over here. So it's saying, are there any decisions that have to be made, or does the robot ever have to think about something? And in this case, they don't. They're just going to take the document and attach it to the PO. So no, very rule-based on this in this case. Now it's asking for input data. And everything's going to be on the computer. There's not going to be a piece of paper because the automation that we want to tackle is going to be after we have taken that piece of paper and saved it to a folder, right? So in this case, by the time we want the bot to consider the process, it's all digital. If it was paper, then we would have to, scoot it back a bit. And this is asking for the structure of my input data. Now, let's assume when we save our receiving document, we're going to save it with the PO number as the name of the file, so it's very structured. That PO number is always going to be the name of the file. If, however, we were just going to name it some random file name and we were expecting the bot to open up the document and find the PO number within the file, then it would be very unstructured because the receiving documents are going to be coming from the vendor and every vendor would have their own format. And so we couldn't tell, go to the upper right corner and that's where you'll find it. So in that case, it would be very unstructured. But because we're expecting the PO number to be the file name, then it's very structured. And this is asking, are there any changes expected in the process or the application in the next 6 months? If changes are expected, you might want to either hold off on the automation until they come through, or at a minimum, you want to make sure that you understand what those changes are and perhaps code to them. Otherwise, you might be putting it in production and immediately having to change it. The next question is asking about documentation. So you have an option to say that there's no documentation available. In this case, I am going to say we have an input file because I'll give a sample of a receiving document. But if you have detailed work instructions, standard operating procedures, if you already have a flow chart or process map, any output file samples, or just miscellaneous anything else that might help in the development of the automation, you only have to check the box. Certainly you can check multiple boxes. In this case, you don't have to attach a file, but if you have one, it's helpful because again, they are going to be using this when they try to generate that automation for you. And so in this case, I'll just give a sample file. And add it in. And the final question they're going to ask you is, who is the process owner? This is because the process owner is going to have to do the detailed assessment for this. If you don't know, that's fine. You just check the I don't know box. If you do know, it's helpful to select them. This process is now going to go to the manager to approve it. And if you don't know the process owner, they have to, because they're not going to be allowed to approve it until they've actually assigned a process owner to it. More than likely, if you're creating it, you probably know the process owner, and if you don't, more than likely your boss would. And that's the last question that needs to be answered. It does give you a chance to review your answers before you submit. And then I'm going to submit that automation idea. The first thing that happens is an assessment score. So it is identifying the suitability, the readiness, and then your overall assessment score. Now this has a 96%, which is quite high. The suitability is based on those first 3 questions we answered. Do you have structured data? Do you have paper-based data? Those questions. The readiness is, do you have any documentation and are there any changes expected? And then these 2 scores combined make up that automation score. So this is done for you. And that's just the automation score based on the initial assessment, just based on those 9 questions I've answered. At this point, if the person submitting the idea wants to capture the task itself, they can do that. They can go into task capture, run through the process, have the system record all their steps, and then that process map then gets attached to the idea as a helpful tool when they're deciding whether or not to go forward with it. That is not a required step, and I'm not going to do it at this point because I'm going to show you that later, but I just wanted to point out that the person submitting it can also generate that task capture document if they want. At this point, I'm going to go into my workspace. And here we have all the ideas that have been submitted. And here's the one I just submitted, this PO receipt attachment. Now it's awaiting review because it's awaiting the manager to go in and say, yes, this is a good idea. We want to go forward with it. If they have not assigned a process owner to it, this is when they would have to do it. And they could do it based on going into the quick view. Right here, if a process owner wasn't assigned, they could just click that and add the process owner. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and approve it because I want to be able to continue on. These are the things that the manager is assessing before they approve it. They want to make sure it's not a duplicate of something that's already in the system. It is adequate for consideration, and we have verified that the details are in fact reliable. Once it's approved, we move into the assessment phase. The assessment has not started yet. And if we look over here in the automation pipeline, if we look at the assessment pipeline, this is where the program manager takes over. What they're going to do is identify which items need to progress. Oops, why did it not go over there? Well, sorry. Let me go over to my automations. Okay, so I'm already in the assessment phase and my process owner is going to do the next steps. So they're going to go into this about area and perform the detailed analysis or detailed assessment on this automation. So I'll go ahead and click the edit button to get in there. And here are my detailed assessment questions. The top part are the pieces that came from the original user when they submitted it. So the first question that's asked is the primary goal for the automation. There are 3. These are not modifiable. These are delivered by UiPath, and so you have to just select one. And from your viewpoint, there might be a combination of them, but you have to pick your main driver. Now, in this instance, we're going to say our main driver is productivity. We're just trying to take that menial task off of the workload of our receiving population. Environmental stability. Now, in the original assessment, we were asked how stable is it? And this is person with perhaps more knowledge is now going to say, are there any changes expected in the process or are there any changes expected in the system? Changes need to be identified in case you want to delay implementation. This is asking for the people who perform this task, how many days a year do they generally work? How many hours in a day do they generally work? And this piece is optional. What is their fully loaded cost of that employee? If you don't fill this in, you will only get hours saved. You'll never get dollars identified. How frequently does the task occur? So we receive daily, and let's say we receive 500 receipts per day, and it usually takes us 5 minutes to go attach that in the system. The system's going to calculate how many hours a year does that equal to. What's your average error rate? We'll go ahead and say a 3% error rate, and it takes us 7 minutes because maybe our PO isn't in the proper status or something, so we have to go fix that and then go attach it. Is your task ever reviewed or audited? In this case, we wouldn't really have an audit on this task, so we're going to leave that as 0. But if you had an audit, actually, I'll just go ahead and put something in just in case. And how long does it take to audit each one? The number of employees who perform the task. This is not used in a calculation as far as FTEs saved. The only time this comes into play is if the solution is going to put an attended robot, which means it needs to be on the desktop of the user. In that case, this would tell us we need 50 robots doing the work because we have 50 people doing the work today. And then here are the savings identified. You could have 5 FTEs or almost $500,000 a year. Process peaks. we're going to have none. There are really no peaks for receiving. Average number of steps for the process, we're going to say less than 20. And the number of ways to complete it, we do it the same way every time. The next 3 questions are asking for data input. What is the percent of digital data? So because we're starting with that scanned document, we're going to say the input is 100% digital. There is no scanned data necessary. I say no data scan necessary because we are not expecting the bot to open up the file and look for that PO number. Instead, we're going to make the file name the PO number so they don't have to go look at scanned data. So that's what that was asking. And the percent of structured data, again, we'll put 80%. Had we expected the bot to find the PO number, it probably would have been less than 40 because, again, we wouldn't be able to tell where in this piece of paper, where on that file the PO number could be found. This additional information, UiPath allows you to add extra questions that might be useful when determining whether or not the idea should be pursued. So this question is used by your business decision makers when either prioritizing or actually identifying which ones to take. It's not used in any of the algorithms that are out there. And I think you can add like up to 50 questions. So, and you can make them optional or required. In this case, it's optional, but we will still say no, there's no SOX control associated with this. The next section is asking for applications that are used in the process. The more applications, potentially the more complex the process. There is an inventory list of applications. So as you start typing, it will go look at that inventory. It is not required that it's found. So if you had a new application, you could add it on the fly and the system would just add it into the inventory. But it's best if you can find it if it's already there because your system administrator has kind of identified the apps that they think are used most frequently in that area of automation. So what's the other one we use? I guess Windows Explorer. You'll also want to identify whether or not it's a thin client because that could add a level of complexity to the automation if they have to go through a thin client. And so the estimated benefit is calculated by the system using those algorithms. So you've got the automation potential, the ease of implementation, the hours saved, the dollars saved, and the FTEs. Okay, so that is the assessment phase. This is the detailed assessment phase. Again, this is performed by the process owner. So I'm going to go ahead and submit the assessment. We also have cost benefit analysis available. This is done by the project manager. So the first thing you see is this estimated cost benefit. So the dollars of the original process and what we expect to save versus what we expect to still have to pay. Now, year 1 will include implementation costs that are not yet defined here, and year 2 will also include any licensing costs, any software costs. So this isn't the full picture. What we need to do is actually go into this cost-benefit analysis to get the full picture of what cost savings we will truly find. Now, the application has estimated that this is going to be an easy thing to do, an easy implementation. And if your developer agrees, then you would select easy. If they disagree, if they say, well, this is a complexity that wasn't included in the algorithm, then it can be changed. You would want to put in your baseline project plan. And then this, once identified, is not going to be changed. This is just, as you're first identifying it, what do you think is going to happen for each stage? So you got analysis, solution design, development, and then testing. Okay, so once you set the baseline, you can't change it, but then it also gives you this actual and new estimate. As you go through the process, you are going to want to set these truly identifying when this truly happens, because it will help you when determining future similar cases. Now, keep in mind, the system will identify your delta. So here's what I thought. I thought it was going to take 6 days. It actually only took 2 kind of thing, or actually only took 4. If your project timeline shifts, that doesn't change your delta. It's only looking at the difference between start and end dates. Here are the costs that you're going to identify. So Automation Hub is actually system agnostic, so you can use a vendor other than UiPath for developing, but we're going to go ahead and say we're doing it for development. We're going to only have 2 a year, but it's going to work every day. We expect it to be 10 times faster than a human. And down here, you identify the potential. We were saying after automation, the system said probably 1% would still have to be manually done. Well, I think we're actually going to have more problems than that just because our POs might not be in the proper order. So we're going to actually say it's probably, we'll still have to do 5% of our processes manually. Total FTEs, this is how many robots do we think are going to be needed? Well, we really think we're just going to need less than 1 actually, because it will be a shared robot, right? Implementation costs, for each phase you're going through, you're going to identify who's going to do the work and what kind of costs are going to be involved. And you would identify all of those to get your costing. Your robot costs, you need to include your licensing for that. We said we needed half of a license, and so that's going to be included in that. And then any other software costs, for instance, if you need the orchestrator, the automation hub, if you have any of those that you want to identify. Support teams, so if you want to identify tier 1, tier 2 support. Infrastructure, if you are on-prem, you're probably going to have some infrastructure costs, and then other costs that might be involved. And then the system is going to identify, sum up all those costs, and then give you a true reading of what your savings would be. So in this case, our year 1 is going to be slightly higher because we have implementation costs, but we are actually going to still have go forward costs because of the cost of the robot and the licensing. The people who are making the decisions whether or not to go forward with this would go into the decision pipeline. And this, they can see where the automations fall. And in fact, here is our PO receipt attachment. So it's, here are the savings, and we highlight it here. We can see it falls in up here, right? And then the people making the decision can approve or reject or just leave it on hold for a while.